stormwater program. And our properties go from Shilshell Bay in the north all the way down to SeaTac Airport in the south. We're along the waterfront. We get stormwater from above and also from the lands that we have participated in developing along the shoreline. We have a diverse group of activities. The Northwest Seaport Alliance is an alliance between the Port of Tacoma and Port of Seattle to manage our container terminals. We also have other maritime, industrial, and innovative activities. We're home port for the North Pacific Fishing Fleet and the largest cruise port on the US West Coast. It's obviously been impacted with COVID-19 lately, but Terminal 91, which you saw just previously, and Pier 66 are both locations where cruise ships come during the summer and fall. We have an environment and sustainability group within the Port of Seattle. My group, the Stormwater Utility, is housed in this part of the organization. And the other kind of work that's done in environmental and sustainability includes remediation, permitting, habitat work that also was mentioned before. We have some new positions that are gearing up in energy and sustainability, and then my stormwater program and the stormwater utility. Back at the turn of this past century, the Port of Seattle endeavored the planning effort that we call our Century Agenda. One of the strategies to be the greenest and most energy efficient port in North America then moved down into objectives and priority actions. And this is the universe that I work in. I joined the port in January 2016, just at the beginning of the stormwater utility, which I'll be talking a little bit more about our history. But our priority action 1 has been completed, implementing a stormwater utility. Prior to 2014, we were included in the City of Seattle's stormwater utility and so paid our fees to the city. With the action by the commission in 2014 to establish a stormwater utility within the port, we initiated that process of becoming our own utility. And by 2016, we had an agreement in place with the City of Seattle and started collecting fees and then making use of those fees for our programs. Our priority action 2, developing green stormwater infrastructure and rainwater capture, those are ongoing activities and challenges, and something that I count as my own priorities. And then 3 is maintaining compliance with our permits. And in Washington State, the stormwater permitting world is very stringent. And so I feel like meeting the requirements of our stormwater permits here in this region is something that we do, and it's a big job. A little bit more about our permit world. I manage a municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 permit, that basically covers all of our port properties. So we're a phase 1 municipality, and we're secondary permittee within the City of Seattle. So following City of Seattle code is another piece of our regulatory world. There are stormwater pollution prevention plans in place for all of our properties, and we help our tenants with a template for that so that they don't have to do that work all by themselves. We do inspections for that. We put together best management practices, information and education. And in our municipal permit areas, if there aren't other permits in place, which I'll talk a little bit more about, there is no vehicle maintenance or equipment cleaning. Those are both triggers for industrial permits if you're a transportation facility, which the port is. We have many tenants on our properties. One of our port locations has an industrial stormwater permit. It's a maintenance yard, but all the other groups on port properties that have non-municipal permits, like industrial or individual or boatyard, are our tenants. And there's about 23 industrial stormwater permits, 4 individual permits, and 3 boatyard permits throughout our maritime properties. Those kinds of permits require quarterly stormwater monitoring, and those tenants are responsible directly to the Washington Department of Ecology. The port, we support them in their best management practices, but they hold the permits, and so it's not our permit for the most part. We're not a regulatory agency, and so we need to use our lease language to help to enforce regulatory requirements. So every lease has, you must meet state, federal, and local requirements, and then we spell it out more specifically with some of our tenants that have complex operations. On the stormwater utility side, I have a staff person who helps to manage that. And so he has his hands full with policy and working with our marine maintenance. Our marine maintenance group is a key part of both our regulatory and our stormwater utility world. They're the folks, the operators, the laborers, the crew chiefs that do all the work on the ground, do the catch basin inspections, and they do a lot of this work that's really important for our stormwater utility. When we established the utility in 2014, it took a few years to work out agreements with the city of Seattle so that we could separate. And then during that time, we started developing our priorities. One of the priorities, which ties back to our century agenda, is that we would assess 100% of our system by the end of 2019. And we managed to do that. And I have a bit more on that a little later. Another, well, something that we had to do before we could even do that, though, was to buy a camera truck. And so these are some of the things that our marine maintenance folks help with. Having a utility, we can fund the assessment, the repair, and rehabilitation of our system at a higher level than we were able to in the past. And we have been able also to keep our drainage rates below those of the city of Seattle, which of course is a different world. They have a much more broad obligations throughout the city than the port. Our world is much more limited. Some of the innovations that we have embraced include innovative stormwater treatments with oyster barrels and a splash box. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We are Salmon Safe certified for parks. That was back in 2003, and we've been able to maintain that Salmon Safe certification for our parks and public access areas, and just recently went through recertification in 2019. We also participated in Clean Marinas and EnviroStar programs for our marinas. And our dock washing protocol, where we capture the wash water, is something that the Department of Ecology has included in the Western Washington manual. So we got some good credit, and I'm sure not everybody's happy with us, but anyway, we're trying to be progressive in how we prevent pollution in our nearshore waters. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the oyster shell system, since I don't talk about it more further in this presentation. But we've been using oyster shells in downspout barrels and in catch basins because we're having some issues with zinc and copper. And the oyster shells are able to react with metals and bind them. And that was in one location, got us in compliance with our industrial stormwater general permit when we were having problems with zinc prior to that. Most of the pollution sources we found was from roadside runoff running onto that property. And so Mercer Island through a King County project, and ECOS has a demonstration project that both show the oyster barrel setup that we've been using for a few years. Some highlights of our stormwater utility include that we completed our system assessment. We thought we had about 78 miles worth of lines, and after refining everything and updating our GIS map, we came out with about 71 miles worth of lines underlying our port properties. We've completed about 50 urgent repairs in the last few years and installed tide gates. Since we are right on the water, all of our properties, having tide gates has helped with both operational and water quality improvements. It allows our folks to get into lines even when there's higher tide and do it safely. We've generally been able to keep our rates about 16% lower than the city of Seattle fees for stormwater for highly industrial areas. And we have focused on some green stormwater infrastructure projects as much as possible. We've done a full evaluation, and Herrera helped us with this to identify the possibilities on our properties. And because we're fill land in many places and we have remediation and where concrete or asphalt, there are some challenges in identifying and installing green stormwater infrastructure, particularly if you rely on infiltration, which we cannot have in certain locations. So it's a fairly limited part of our program, but we do put effort toward that. And we also were recognized by the American Association of Port Authorities, AAPA. In 2019, we got an award for excellence for innovations, including the dock scrubber, the oyster shell barrels, and something that we call a media washing machine. Our marine maintenance put this together to wash off the oyster shells. We're having some problems with supply. We get our shells from Taylor Shellfish, but the supply is not always steady for our different uses. So we're playing with the idea of refreshing the oyster shells through washing them and tumbling them, and then making use of them again. And we're just kind of at the beginning of that to see how effective these repurposed oyster shells will be in the barrels we use them in. Okay. Here's one of our GSI. This is basically, some people like to call it a dumpster. I do not, but basically it's a roll-off container that's a bioretention unit. This first was adopted at the port back in 2014 when one of our commissioners at the time saw this down in Tacoma and said, we need to do this. So they brought it up to Terminal 91, put it on 2 of these boxes, taking roof runoff on a galvanized roof. And so it was very high levels of zinc, and the box was effective. We repurposed them in 2019, so they were in more visible areas. So right now we have them at our Horton Street yard, taking parking lot runoff, and the Maritime Industrial Complex up near Fisherman's Terminal, where they take roof runoff. We've been testing them since late 2019, and the results have been good in reducing. We look at copper, zinc, and turbidity, and we also look at levels of pH. We've discontinued the monitoring of this for now because of COVID-19. It's a voluntary program, and so we just have our field folks going out and doing regulatory or infrastructure critical issues. So we won't have any data for the next few seasons on this, but it is something that we will be tracking. We also do this with the oyster shells, monitoring influent and effluent. And then this is another one of it's our first in-ground GSI project. This is on Centennial Park, just north of where the grain terminal is. You can see in the one picture is the fence that takes you out to the pier for the Louis Dreyfus grain terminal. We put this in because there was a ponding issue on the bike trail. And so to solve that, we decided we'd both regrade, but we thought, well, it's an opportunity to put a rainwater catchment system in, or infiltration area. So that's what this looks like it was last sunny Friday. I got some new pictures. I thought I'd make use of them. And then this is a really critical part of our stormwater utility, where we do these pipe assessments. We have our marine maintenance team. They go out, they evaluate, they have to sometimes, not always, but often clean the pipes before they can send the camera down. So this little picture, the second from the left, is our camera, one of them. It goes down the line, and you see the bottom right picture is camera footage. So we take videos of the length of the pipe. We're looking for problems like fractures or breaks. And then our operator goes to the computer in the camera truck, and he's looking, or she is looking at the footage, applies a rating system that our stormwater utility directors put together as a policy to determine how you rank it. So the higher the number, the worse the problem. We're showing you an example of a pipe collapse, which is about as high a ranking as you could get at 99. And so this would have been urgent repair. We excavated, repaired, and then do the infill. So this kind of takes you through a typical process for an urgent repair, but it's something that we've been able to now identify for all of our pipes. We pretty much know what the condition is. And honestly, we weren't expecting as good a results as we got. We thought we'd have a lot more urgent repairs than we had, so we've been fortunate. Our assessment goals are here. So we basically got our camera truck in 2017 and started our approach to 100% success of assessing the system by the end of last year. There's about a 3% that we haven't been able to get to, and that will have to be taken care of during reconstruction for changing the lines because there might be dead ends or some other areas that were inaccessible. But basically, the 71 miles of line, we pretty much understand, 98% of the assets we have in the ground. And then another one of our Century Agenda goals is to rehabilitate 75% of our system by 2035. So this just shows us our goals through 2020, which is to reach, 30%. What we count as rehabilitation is when we can say a pipe is good as new. The simplest end of the spectrum is if we have a good pipe and it just needs cleaning. The hardest end of the spectrum is when we have to do a complete repair or even a system line repair. So we have our work cut out for us, and our budget for 2020 is shown here. We have some capital projects, value around $2 million. The T18 outfall renewal, there's a container terminal there, and they're doing stormwater treatment installation. SSA Marine is. So we're coordinating some outfall repairs and replacement that we identified a number of years ago. Currently, it's on hold, not because of COVID, but because of timing with the other construction going on at the site. And we have oil water treatment we're going to be installing and other replacements. Our admin budget, which is our staff costs and utility taxes, is about 2.3. And then our maintenance budget, which is our maintenance team at marine maintenance, is about, what is that? I can't see my slide. 3. Anyway, it's expensive. So that's what I hope to share with you. And this is a picture of Fisherman's Terminal looking back to the city of Seattle. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Those are awesome statistics. I did put a comment up there. I do corrosion and cathodic protection, and it's highly unusual to see a public utility have that level of assessment work done. So that's definitely applause to you and your efforts. It's great. I don't think a lot of people realize that, failure like the one you saw on the camera, when you consider what that water is going to do, right, and the ancillary effects. So and maybe to get some questions going, have you had,
Can I see the questions without? Do I need to?
Yeah, I could read them too, but have you had any experience where, or an idea where you could compare the cost savings of doing this assessment work as opposed to finding out that you need to do repair work, through like ancillary damage or potholes or sinkholes, I should say.
Yeah, that would be an interesting exercise in doing a cost comparison. Before we had our camera truck and the ability to check things out, you find out you have problems because of related problems like a collapse or a sinkhole or something like that. Now that we have information on all of our systems, we can monitor those that need to be monitored. We can repair those that critical, or maybe fit into a capital improvement project. So it makes sense to do the repairs during that time. But yeah, I mean, preventing a sinkhole is usually a lot more cost effective than making the repair after there's already a problem. And you can imagine on some of our facilities with these, big equipment, it could really be a safety hazard to not understand the condition of our systems. So, our universe is limited compared to like King County or the city of Seattle. We're fortunate that we only have 71 miles worth of lines that we need to keep track of and related, infrastructure associated with that. But I can't imagine how we would go through doing a cost comparison of before and after. I suppose we could figure that out somehow, but that's not something we're grappling with right now.
We have a question from Deborah. Given port facilities are at sea level, how much groundwater recharging is achievable via bioswales? And are projects like that to avoid flooding spots? Or is it to slow and clean runoff?
So good question. So the one place we've done that, the rain garden at in the park, basically at Centennial Park, part of it is water quality treatment. You know, it's better to slow and let the water go through soil before it goes out to the near shore waters. You know, the risk of pollution at on a bike trail is very low compared to other kinds of transit corridors. So, yeah, I mean, there aren't a whole lot of opportunities for infiltration, and in some cases, we wouldn't even want to do infiltration because of the remediation soils or the caps or whatever we have on our different properties. So there's not in the kind of properties that Port has, there's not a ton of opportunity to do something like a rain garden. But we do have parks. We have 26 parks and public access areas. So that's you know, a lot of our landscaping, which also takes stormwater and doesn't count necessarily as a stormwater system, is in our parks. And so, yeah. And those parks are all salmon safe certified, so we're not using pesticides, and we're very careful about our fertilizers. So we're trying not to contribute to landscape type pollution in those situations. Did I answer her question?
Yeah, I think Deborah, Deborah, you're unmuted if you want to respond.
I actually just typed it into, said yes. No, that's interesting, and I'm curious about the challenges overall with thinking about water when you're already at sea level.
Right, right. There's not much space there. And one project that we tried to get going at Shilsha Bay Marina with pervious pavement became an engineering challenge because the engineers did not want water to be collecting behind that seawall. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. When we have things like the above ground, you know, the oyster barrels or the splash boxes, those allow us to do treatment without dealing with infiltration. So we're, you know, above ground treatment. And some of our big container terminals, they're having to install different kinds of treatment system to meet their permit requirements. Some of those might involve vaults, you know, below ground and then treatment that way. But it's something that wouldn't be infiltrating, of course, because you're treating it and then you're letting it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jane. I'm going to move on to Ryan, but if anybody has questions, feel free to populate them, and I'll make sure, you know, when everybody's done with our presentations, we'll go ahead and get them answered. But yeah, when you go around and see how many assets the port is maintaining and reducing pollution from, it's quite impressive. Ryan, I am passing the privileges to you.
Okay. I'll get that set up.
And this is introducing Ryan Biava with the Seattle City Lights. He is working on behalf of innovation and the electrification strategy as we move into the future. And you know, his favorite book while his shelter in place was in place was New Pioneers: The Back to the Land Movement and the Search for a Sustainable Future. I am adding that to my list right now. That sounds amazing. And Ryan, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it's an academic text. It's pretty dense, but I was very curious recently in thinking about a lot of this future-focused electrification work about. So it's about the back to the land movement in the 70s, 60s and 70s. So what type of people were they? What were they interested in? What motivated them? So I was very interested in what were the earliest sort of recent sustainability movement. What were they doing? So it's a good book. It's dense read, but it's good. So thanks for the invitation. While I'm giving the presentation, I'm going to turn my video off so I can look at notes and such. But thanks for the invitation to be here. If I can figure out how to turn my video off, just give me 1 second here. I'm not sure how to let me do that. Let's see. 1 second. Well, I'll give up on that. So I also really love the story about the oyster barrel. Like that's pretty amazing to learn. I had no idea. I work at Seattle City Light in the Electrification and Strategic Technology Division. I've been there about 3 years. I have a background before that in technology policy and public policy as well. I teach a class at the University of Washington on municipal technology with a professor in the College of Built Environments, Urban Design and Planning. And we talk about how cities' infrastructure and technology have evolved over time. And so it's a nice overlap to work at City Light at a time when the business model and technological model really is the technological model changing everything else is really feels like it's reversing how everything's been operating in the past. So I want to talk about that. I've spent my time there working on a few projects related to organizational innovation as well. So helping to form this organization and figure out how a municipal electric utility can work on innovation and electrification and just be really sort of more matched with where the industry is going. And so that's been really interesting to see. So I'm just going to launch right into it. I have 4 sort of main ideas I'll talk about. I need to move a video box is in the way. There we go. So the first, like I said, sort of the technological models of electric utilities are really changing, which is, I think, a now familiar story across industries, as you'll see. That's what I've got. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Ryan. We do have a question from Brock. Brock, I'll go ahead and unmute so you can ask the question.
I don't know how relevant it is to your particular work, but the simple question was whether you, in addition to electric vehicles, whether you're investing in electric bikes.
Nice to see you again, by the way. No, that's not something that I believe that we've been working on, as far as I know. When we are not purchasing electric vehicles. There's a state law passed to allow public utilities to support transportation electrification infrastructure, but not the purchase of vehicles themselves.
So to follow up, I understand that, meaning we might see charging infrastructure that, it's not Electrify America, it's Seattle City Light.
So yeah, so a colleague of mine works on charging infrastructure, and there have been certainly some initial infrastructure that's been put up, but as you know, there are a number of companies and partners that would love to put in the city, and so that's a huge process of figuring out how to do that and how that's well managed. But that's absolutely something that we want to support so that we can promote adoption.
Yeah, and I like how you said, the idea of taking on some risk for fear of making mistakes, but it's something that we have to do. And part of that, I'm a huge automotive enthusiast. They can't even agree on a standard approach for plug, voltage, sure, but I imagine that presents additional challenges to saying, okay, which one are we going to adopt? And then, taking on the risk of litigation or any, it's a complicated subject, right?
Right, and City Light doesn't take a sort of position on what it will support and what it won't. I mean, what the market deploys, and we want to be able to support people's using and adopting the technology.
Awesome. Let me just check and make sure there's no other unaddressed questions. Like I said, if anything else comes up, we'll circle back around. But let's see. Dennis had a question. Dennis, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Ryan. Thanks for that presentation. I was just wondering, maybe you covered it and I missed it, but when you look over the next 20 years and you see the trend towards electrification of buildings and especially transportation electrification and the movement towards electric vehicles, you know, a city light, can you handle the load, or are we going to run out of power? And what's that look like as a generalization, really high level?
Yeah, it's a common question and it's a good question. From what I understand from my colleagues who think about that almost full time is that there is enough power and there will be enough power. And one of the recent developments that you might have read about is that Seattle City Light joined the energy imbalance market, which is sort of a complicated system that allows electric utilities and generators across the West Coast and the West, actually, west of the mountains, to pool together and have extra capacity to transmit and to buy power at 5 and 15-minute windows. So that's one way. Also, it's about to have more capacity on the short term. But in general, there is enough power. And as I mentioned, the load has been steady or decreasing, which is an interesting phenomenon despite all of the major construction and population growth in Seattle. So I'd have to get the actual numbers for you, but there are people who spend all their days thinking about that, and for sure that's something that will be able to be met yet.
Okay, thank you. Robert, do I have time for a follow-up question or not?
We are a little bit behind. Go ahead and type it, and then Ryan, we could get that answered in the Q&A. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'm going to transition over to Jordan Wildish with Earth Economics, an organization I'm learning more and more about. I enjoyed your presentation at Green Infrastructure Summit. He is the project director at Earth Economics, working with municipalities to use natural capital valuation to inform better decision making. During shelter in place's favorite meal was homemade pizza, and I'm on board with that. I got my first slices from Ballard Pizza yesterday. Jackie saw me eating them on the call, so way to go with the homemade pizza. What's your favorite topping?
We did one that was nettles, like nettles in a white sauce. It was really tasty.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna write down nettles. I'm learning from this.
All right, let's see. Get this screen going. Okay. All right, are you seeing the slide view now?
Good.
Great. All right, well, thanks, Robert. So my name is Jordan Wildish. Earth Economics is a nonprofit based in Tacoma, Washington. We work broadly on quantifying and valuing ecosystem services, and using these values to make the case for and find funding for nature-based solutions. So my topic today is how to make the economic case for urban green infrastructure, or urban GI. So I want to start by talking about the big picture and where GI fits in. And then I'll delve into how to make the economic case for these specific systems. So big picture here, this is the LA River. In the past, when cities thought about flood control, they thought about something like this, these kind of gray monoliths. In the economic analysis, they looked at the cost of the system, the flood control protection benefits, and probably not much else. They wouldn't have considered the environmental impacts in too much detail beyond a cursory analysis, nor the social benefits or costs. The result is a functional asset that fills a purpose, but also divides the neighborhood and doesn't provide anything else for the community. However, flood control can also look more like this. This is an example in Seattle, Thornton Creek. So here the city worked on a flood control project. We helped them with some ecosystem service values in the business case analysis. So now instead of a single gray monolith designed for one purpose, pushing water downstream as fast as possible, you have a resilient, sustainable asset that provides flood protection, but also benefits like salmon habitat, improving property values, water quality, and recreation. So the previous example illustrates a shift in thinking in economics. Economics used to think that the economy was the big thing and the environment was housed within it. In this view, the environment was a nice to have in an urban planning context, but certainly not core to planning. Today, economists are beginning to recognize that, in fact, the environment is the big thing, the big system, and our economy is housed within that and reliant upon it. Every person and home, building, or business resides within a landscape, which you can clearly see from the satellite view. So green infrastructure, or GI, is an application of this new way of thinking. I'm going to focus today on urban GI solutions aimed at water management, which is the most common use case we see, but there's a lot of different cases here. I'll quickly run through what this can look like in an urban setting. So urban trees are probably the most ubiquitous form we see. A recent study in California found that for every $1 spent on tree planting and maintenance, urban trees return nearly $6 in public benefits. These benefits include stormwater management, stormwater capture, home value increases, air quality improvements, energy cost savings, and the list goes on and on. Green roofs are also a common and valuable tool. Plants used can range from ultra low maintenance drought tolerant species to food crops or native pollinators. In addition to stormwater retention and water treatment benefits, these installations also cut energy bills and reduce local heat islands, which is really important. And the last one on my list, although we could go on and on here, are urban parks. Communities are using parks more and more for innovative land use solutions for issues like land subsidence or flood protection or brownfield remediation. I'll go into that a little bit more depth in a minute with an example. So based on those kind of orienting to what we think about GI, there's 3 key concepts we've learned from working on urban GI projects that I want to briefly touch on. So one is that the green versus gray conversation is not so much an either or, but a both and. So the most effective stormwater solutions we've seen use a combination of both green and gray systems. There are certainly cases or certainly projects where a levee or a CSO tank is needed as the best option. But by integrating distributed upstream GI, you can reduce the peak flows considerably downstream and use a smaller CSO tank and save money. That tends to be the systems that are most effective is a combination of green and gray. Green where it's appropriate, green where it works, and then gray to kind of go that last mile. GI is also increasingly practical and cost effective. As more and more projects are built, we know more about the effectiveness and the costs and the benefits, and so we're seeing more and more projects that are not just beneficial for the community, but truly cost effective and cost competitive. An example of that on a city scale, Philadelphia just began their process of the Green Cities Clean Water Program, which is one of the largest scale programs we know about in the US, targeting green infrastructure. And they approached this with the pure goal of reducing their CSO challenges, which is a major issue in the city. And they considered a fully gray traditional option or a green-gray combination approach, and found that the gray-only option costs like 2.5 times more than the combination approach. And so they moved forward with this green combination option. And in this program, they're trying to capture as much water upstream in communities as possible through installations of distributed GI. And the system as it is now, about 85% of water is captured by the GI installations, and the remainder is captured by gray infrastructure. They've already reported creating 430 local jobs just from this investment. And they're measuring sort of the impact of a dollar in the community, and found that every dollar invested in this infrastructure generates $2.7 in local economic output within the city itself. The third point I want to highlight is that GI provides social, environmental, and economic benefits above and beyond a traditional gray system. Just a few here, I've touched on it previously. GI, like tree installations or green space, increases home values considerably, as much as 20% in some cases. GI installations also improve air quality. For example, New York City's urban trees are estimated to save the city $16 million in pollutant removal costs due to avoided health impacts every year. And heat islands, I mentioned previously, urban trees and green roofs are one of the most cost-effective or most effective period ways to mitigate urban heat islands. Heat islands are actually the deadliest weather-related disaster in the United States, more than fires or floods. It's especially important to address these now, and because these solutions take a few years to begin to work in full, like urban trees, preparing for the next decades to come as urban heat gets more and more extreme is crucially important. So to better account for these and other benefits, we need a better way of valuing the benefits and costs of infrastructure projects, both green and gray. So back to the first example of the LA River, when that floodway was built, they considered the capital costs and the O&M costs and the performance target for flood control, and that's about it. That's where it stopped. They didn't look at the impact to the neighborhood, the emissions of the concrete used. They didn't go beyond that. So a holistic benefit cost analysis, or a triple bottom line analysis, many names here, includes the full scope of environmental, social, and economic impacts of infrastructure, whether green or gray. Includes things like not just the central function and the capital and O&M, but also things like carbon emissions and capture, water quality impacts, air quality impacts, to allow to kind of evenly compare a number of different solutions. So as an example of this, we partnered on a project in New Orleans, Mirabeau Gardens. The project is a traditional park with all the amenities you would expect, playgrounds and bike paths, but it's also designed to capture millions of gallons of stormwater in the event of a storm surge, which is a critical issue in New Orleans. So we conducted this benefit cost analysis of the project, including not just the traditional capital and O&M costs, but a full scope of social and environmental benefits, including property value uplift, recreational benefits, carbon, both emissions and storage. Our analysis found that every dollar invested in the project returned nearly $6 in public benefits. And the project is now under development at opening next year, I believe. So I want to touch briefly on the funding and financing question, which is one we get a lot and is oftentimes a sticking point or a concern when cities or municipalities are considering green and gray options. So I'm not going to go into too much depth on these, but I just want to highlight that there are more and more ways coming online to fund and finance GI. So this first one here, GASB 62, not to go too in the weeds, it's an accounting standard from the GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They issued a clarification in 2018, which solidified the pathway for a utility to debt finance distributed infrastructure, which is a lot of jargon. The upshot is that things like rebates for rain gardens or turf buyback programs can be debt financed through bonds or loans. This has been in place in some places for a while, but this clarification kind of solidified the pathway, which is a really major hurdle for utilities in scaling up these programs. We know that those turf buyback rebates or the low flow faucet rebates are the most effective way of reducing or either increasing water capture or reducing water consumption. Those distributed rebates are like the most cost-effective period, and now with this ability to bond finance that, we think there'll be a way for utilities to really scale up those investments. We're also seeing a surge in environmental impact bonds, which are bonds tied to financial repayment for GI performance. So for example, a bond will pay back based on how well the GI meets specific targets. So for a city, that means they don't have to worry as much about the performance of the GI, since if it doesn't meet targets, then they won't have to pay back as much. So it's a way for the city to kind of insure against these somewhat new and somewhat uncertain assets in some contexts. We're seeing those being developed in Baltimore and DC, and there are many, many more on the way. And finally, what we're probably most excited about, we've worked with FEMA over the past several years, and they actually use our ecosystem service values in their cost benefit evaluation tool. This means that FEMA can fund natural infrastructure projects with disaster risk reduction benefits. So for example, in the context of fire, a project that will install native vegetation in the place of chaparral brush can demonstrate a significant reduction in fire risk to adjacent communities, and that thus can be funded through FEMA dollars. Same story for preserving wetlands or installing mangroves. These have a really well demonstrated reduction in disaster risk, and thus are eligible for FEMA funding. They're rolling out a new program called Building Resilient Infrastructure for Communities, or BRIC, which will be a significant pot of funding aimed at pre-disaster mitigation, and GI projects are really strong candidates for these funds. And on our minds, and I'm sure all of yours as well, is how we can rebuild a resilient economy coming out of this crisis. And we see GI as a crucial and compelling component of stimulus packages going forward. Both because GI is often more effective dollar for dollar than gray-only infrastructure, and this is crucial when dollars are scarce. Another component of our work is input-output modeling, estimating the local impacts of an economic investment. what we see consistently is that GI has a greater local economic impact than gray systems. So that means that when a city invests in, let's say, a system of urban trees and rain gardens versus a giant CSO tank, more of those dollars stay in the community. And that's because for that giant CSO tank, you might have to hire out-of-state engineering firms or get materials from out of state or out of country. Whereas with GI, you can source more material and labor locally in most job markets. So the numbers vary county by county, but one recent site we worked on, we found that the gray option, or the green option rather, generated 3.5 times more local in-county jobs than the gray alternative, which is really critical as we're looking to invest in and rebuild our communities. So GI can also be developed incrementally as distributed projects, like those, piece by piece rain gardens or urban parks, rather than a giant capital investment all up front, which can be really important when budgets are tight. And finally, the last piece is that GI has a really tangible public health benefits, which gray solutions don't. This is crucially important in this recovery, from promoting recreation to improving air quality and mitigating urban heat. In a time when public health is top of mind, we think that these benefits are really important and really crucial to highlight. So my last slide here, we were developing a decision support tool to evaluate the financial case for GI in the Puget Sound based on the social, environmental, and economic impacts I highlighted today. There's more information on this work on our website. We're looking to talk to folks who are engaged in stormwater work in their business and would love to speak with anybody on the call who's interested. And thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to present here and would love to chat with anyone further at my email, and I'll pass it off. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. You could leave that up for a minute so people can get that email. I could also put that in the chat if anybody wants to connect. Again, I think you'd be hard pressed to find any investment that's going to have 6 times return. That's going to also be providing habitat and all those social benefits. Also, another proof that green assets are good for social society at a local scale, right? That's definitely something that I learned from that. Cynthia McCoy had a comment that she says the BRIC funding replacing pre-disaster mitigation should be available fall 2020. Any comment to that?
Yeah, we're really excited. So this is a expansion of the what you mentioned, the pre-disaster mitigation funding, and the big change here, moving from PDM to BRIC, is an increase in funding size. So BRIC funding is now tied to 6% of the disaster costs in the previous year, which is a little bit convoluted, but equates to between 500 million and $1 billion in funding each year, depending on the severity of the previous disaster year. So that's a big increase.
I'm going to go ahead and switch presenters, but if any other comments, questions come up, like I said, put them in the Q&A box and we'll get them answered. And Jordan, I'll throw up a website and email in the chat dialogue. And without further ado, I want to introduce Jaki Rowbottom. We've been working together to build Infrastructure Week. They're a marketing sponsor. So again, thank you very much. The input has been awesome. I've really enjoyed working with their team, her and Mason, who I believe is on the call. KiteRocket helps market sustainable technologies, communicating and engaging audiences to support change.
Yes.
And this is your food, right, during COVID?
Yeah.
Using more imperfect produce to reduce waste and teach kids supermarket perfection doesn't equal best taste. It's so true.
Yes.
The best tomatoes are often the ugliest tomatoes.
And the best ones come straight off your vine at home. So, it's there's such a different taste between, the supermarket and home. And we've been, because life is so busy all the time, commuting and running back and forward, now we're taking some time to actually have a look at what we're eating and using what's already in the fridge. So it's been an interesting time. And thank you for that introduction. Yeah, as you mentioned, we've definitely had a lot of conversations recently. So I'm very happy to be here. And we've also, we've been talking about the importance of marketing for large and technical projects, and also looking at the myriad of infrastructure projects across Seattle. So it's great to be here today. And as you obviously mentioned as well, I work in KiteRocket's Seattle office when we're not working from home. Of course, you may see a child or a cat play bingo, whatever it is. You might see everything from me today. So I'm part of our renewable energy team, and we focus on sustainable technologies and green energy as well. And we're a full service agency, so we work on PR, communications, marketing, digital, and graphic design too. So outside of Seattle, we have other offices in San Francisco, Phoenix, and we cover the consumer, tech, and renewable energy sectors, just to give you an understanding of our reach there. Bit of background on myself. I'm not from Seattle, but I do love it here. I've been here for about 4 years, and prior to joining KiteRocket, I worked in the water industry as a media advisor and community engagement specialist. That's a mouthful. And I worked in a government organization, and we looked after wastewater, drinking water, and also waterway health for 4 million residents. And these were the projects that I worked on were mainly for large infrastructure projects and waterway health projects. And so I've worked closely with engineers, project managers, scientists, techs, you name it, for most of my career. So when you think marketing and how is this all fitting together, we all have worked very closely in the past. So today I wanted to give you a bit of an insight into the fundamental elements of a successful marketing campaign, not only in the tech space, but also for infrastructure projects, and using some of my own examples from my work in waterways as well. So we know utilities and infrastructure professionals in particular are an essential service, and Robert, you said that as well at the beginning too, where it's now more than ever, we're really understanding how much so. So the community often spends money through taxes, sometimes begrudgingly, I'm sure. So how do you show homeowners who can't pay their bills or they don't see the service you provide that you are worthy of their money, that continuing infrastructure projects and tech development is a crucial part of the city's sustainable growth? And how can communication tools help you empower your marketing team to be more flexible and address fears of your consumer base as well? So the question is there as well, how does a company be nimble, especially when you're selling something, you maybe have 5 minutes to sell it, but the community may not even see it for 5 to 10 years. So I wanted to start today by sharing a little story about my first challenge in the water industry as a media advisor. And a challenge with a KPI I actually took as a personal chance to assist with waterway health. I'm an environmentalist at heart, it's where I love to work. And so this has been a highlight of my career, but it's also guided it. And it wasn't about making money or spinning stories, because I absolutely promise that's not what marketing and PR is always about, or is about, to be honest. But bringing possibly the shyest animal on the planet into the spotlight where it did not want to be. But for the sake of the species, this little guy needed to get used to some media attention. And as you probably guessed, it's our little platypus. He's a quirky looking monitory. He's endemic to Eastern Australia. This duck-billed, beaver-tailed, otter-footed creature is actually so unusual that there are records of early settlers in Australia who tried to explain it to Europeans who believed it was actually fake. In fact, there was a joke that several animals were sewn together and it was just, these people were making it up. It can't actually be real. So although the platypus is now fully protected, he was hunted for its fur until the early 20th century. But by far, the biggest threat this guy sees is pollution, stormwater runoff, commercial waste, dog droppings, dogs off leads, and of course, habitat destruction. So this is not a dissimilar story to many native animals around the globe. Seattle is not exempt. We've got salmon, we've got other animals as well. So the platypus really became a symbol. And within the urban waterways around Melbourne, this is the second most populated city in Australia, by the way, they continue to live, but they're mostly unknown by residents. So to raise the profile of the waterways and the drainage, urban drainage systems, the first challenge we had was to elevate the brand of the platypus. And no doubt all Australians know about a platypus from an early age. It's on our 20-cent piece, countless children's books. But what's interesting here is that when we surveyed local communities, very few people knew just how many actually lived in their backyard creek. And I'm talking literally in their backyard. And so the communities I was working for could not even physically see the platypus. So they didn't even know it existed. So taking their dog for a swim in the creek wasn't an issue because, it doesn't, if you can't see it, it doesn't matter. So even those community members who thought of themselves as environmentally conscious, they just didn't know. And so water down the drain, not an issue because it wasn't really hurting anyone. And it became a case of educating and showing and then telling. So we put together a multidimensional marketing plan to first elevate the brand of the platypus, to create that emotion and actually more of a care factor for residents. And so our marketing team was brought in completely into the project fold to advise on announcements in new DNA technology, online tracking, citizen science projects, and all of us gave us a chance to show and not just tell the community. So being a part of that everyday team really ensured that we had visuals for television, timely digital and social messaging, and meant that the team could craft messaging ahead of issues or campaigns and then really get on the front foot. So knowing your audience or your community, it really does become key to your marketing success. So before you even start writing a marketing strategy, it's really important to spend some time researching and really fully understanding your audience. Otherwise, you will absolutely be talking to no one. So behavior change or buy-in of your product comes with reinforced messages. So by doing your homework, which may involve community surveys like we did with the platypus, or even just an internal in-depth assessment of who your key stakeholders really are. It's a way that you can begin to understand where your audience is actually listening and what they're listening to. And importantly, how do they want to receive messages? Because remember, what you say and what they want to hear can be very vastly different things. So it's important to get to know who your audience is and what motivates them. And then move on to understanding why they would even care about your product, technology, community project. Is it a NIMBY situation? We know they come up. Or does your technology solve a problem for them? Do they even care about the environment? Do they really even know the technical specs of your product? Or is it more of an educational piece to try and show them what happens when the toilet flushes, for example? So really thinking about what problem you are solving so that they can buy in. And understanding also where your audience is listening is extremely important. So are you talking to trade media, for example, who like to have more specific technical information? Or, are you being featured on King 5 News, for example, where you've got about 20 seconds or less to convince your audience your project is a game changer? The other thing you need to think about is social media. That's a very important place to be thinking about these days. Is it more popular in your community, but you don't have a social media presence? My advice, get one. Probably time to invest and get set up. And before crafting a press release as well, really know your audience so you can write for them. So if you're looking to be featured in the Seattle Times, make sure you write the press release for the audience as well, because if it's too complicated, it just simply won't be heard or picked up. And make sure your message solves a problem for the readership and is in the public interest to know as well. So simple technical details probably won't be enough, but once you've done your audience homework and you've adjusted your messages for each audience, you can set up your strategy and your execution from there. One thing I like to talk about is, while you may know your project is going to change the world, if you can't put yourself in the shoes of your audience, it just won't get engagement, or for some projects, even worse, it just won't get the buy-in that it needs. So the other thing we look at as well for messages and audience is a proactive approach. So before the NIMBYs raise their heads, it's always preferred and appreciated by so many communities that you reach out personally in some cases before you even announce a new project, because often fear is what drives community outrage. Fear of the unknown can be so confronting for so many communities. So knowing what your audience has campaigned for previously, knowing what they read, where they get their information, what they listen to, and why they listen to it can be extremely beneficial for your marketing campaign. So that brings me to my next point. Sustainable technologies can be complicated. So, for example, how do you show hydrogen technology to someone who knows nothing about chemistry, for example? You want media to cover your new digester because, well, we all know that it's an awesome feat of technology, and who doesn't want to talk about the fascinating process of sewage sludge and methane gas? I love it, but it may not hit your audience that you need to convince that this is a game-changing piece of technology. And the vast majority of people don't know what anaerobic digestion is, or the complicated process is probably not worth their time. So even with renewable energy, which I work with predominantly these days, it's technical. It's taken me a while to get my head around it, and I know I don't know it, 100% right now as it is. So, megawatts, inverters, batteries, panels, I could go on, but we know people want to live a greener lifestyle, but how do you go from knowing that to getting them to commit to $20,000 worth of solar panels on their roof? I mean, that's where the challenge lies. So simplicity really is key when we're marketing new technology. So begin by thinking about the technology itself and how it impacts on people's lives. And put yourself in the shoes of the audience, like I said before. So, do you need to take it back to basics? So begin with a general overview of wastewater cycle, for example. How much do people already know? I recently worked with a community solar company in the Bay Area to help reach underserved communities. Sorry. So I know most of you know community solar is where local solar facilities are shared by multiple community subscribers who receive a credit on their electric bills for power produced that they use. And it helps bring renewable energy to communities who could just never afford the price of residential solar. And for those who rent or live in multifamily homes, it's an option to help the environment and save on their bills. But the question again, the actual process of getting electricity from solar facility to the homeowner is complicated. Why would anyone sign up if they don't even understand it? So stripping the process right back, creating simple, short explainer animation videos was one way we could show the process, and it became a key part of our strategy to bring messages to the community. And just on the topic of explainer videos, we do find that they really, really do work. They keep the messaging simple, and a lot of people are visual thinkers as well. So they like to be able to see things in action. I worked on projects with retarding basins in Australia. A lot of people there did not understand why they had a retarding basin in their backyards. So we did our audience research, and what we realized is that people just did not understand how they worked, how they protected life, how they protected property, and why the upgrades were actually necessary. So by giving them simple messages through graphics, visuals, and in many cases, we actually took them on site and showed them why trees needed to be removed, we were able to mitigate a lot of community confusion and outrage as well. So what I've just said is probably all good in theory, but how do we actually get people to listen and take action? And so anyone who works with me knows I do love a good metric. It gives us storytelling and marketing professionals the actual data on the who, what, where, why, when, and how. I mean, that's what we write to, but sometimes we just don't know who's listening. So the data we have on audience consumption of video, though, is undeniable. So I put some amazing stats up on the screen here. And then you couple that with the use of social media, and it really is a no-brainer. Viewers are watching as much video content online now as they're watching television. And if you have young kids, like I do, you'll know the power of YouTube. Just yesterday, my son actually was excited because a new episode of his favorite show was coming online. And when I asked him what channel, he looked at me like I had two heads, and he said, YouTube. So, it's there. It's in front of us. We need to embrace it. So online videos are being consumed at an enormous rate. And this goes for explainer videos too, as I mentioned before. A lot of DIY videos as well on YouTube. And I don't know who hasn't searched DIY video. And the third stat I have there really proves this point, because it's estimated by 2022, online videos will make up more than 82% of all consumer internet traffic. Now that's 15 times higher than 2017. And so the message here I just wanted to leave with you as well is get visual and take it social. You need to take those messages where the people are. And remember that messaging shouldn't be packaged just as words on a page, because it's not the only way people are consuming media these days. And visual planning should be as much as your PR, strategy as a press release, actually probably more. And you can actually combine the two now. There's services to help you do that. And a lot of PR agencies are helping people with that. So you could take a very modern day look at a problem for community infrastructure, flushable wipes, right? So I hate them. I don't know anyone who likes them. But how can they, how they market them as flushable? People are still thinking from those marketers in the consumer area, oh, I can just take these, they're flushable, of course. But as communicators of infrastructure on government budgets, how do we begin to outmarket the Procter & Gamble's of the world with flushable wipes, for example? So I know it's gross, but we show it. And that's great. So, I mean, I'm sure most of the people who are listening today are familiar with the Fatberg of London. And it's real and it's extremely effective to show these photos. These photos went viral across the world a couple of years ago and enacted change. People started to see that, oh, wipes are not flushable. This is what happens. This is where they go. So these images really change people's minds and really their consumption habits as well. So I'm going to leave you with the Fatberg so you can show your story and yeah, think about that image. But one of the questions as well is, how do you obtain enough footage and creative ideas to keep constant need for content? Because you see companies, they're constantly putting out things. It's social media. They've always got great visuals and that sort of thing. So one of the things I tell people as well is you have a great tool at your disposal. If you don't have the multi-million-dollar budgets for marketing, you've got a mobile phone. So between your marketing team and your mobile phone, you can start getting some really great visuals of out on the field, some videos. These things can be quite good with content, and your marketing team will also know how to put them together as well. They also make great B-roll footage for the local news, and also when you're at a community event or a community meeting as well, if you're doing community engagement, film it, because these things you can put together as an end of project. You can show how you've engaged community. It's a really good way to look back on things. The other thing I recommend as well is interviewing the scientists behind the technology to help craft your messages and pitch to local TV. Media outlets are starved for video content at the moment. So going back to the platypus, the only way I could get them platypus on the 5 o'clock news was to get permission to send our social media manager to a creek overnight with the science team. And he filmed the entire process at about 3, 4 in the morning of trapping and the routine health checks that the community just would not see otherwise. They had no idea this was going on. And then owned platypus footage that we then had for ourselves, and we could market that too. So make sure that your videos are truly helpful to your audience as well, not just content for the sake of content. It has to fit into your strategy and goals. One of my favorite video campaigns ever was creating bite-sized fun fact videos for a treatment plant opening that we did. It was an open day, sorry. And how do you get the community interested in spending the day at a sewage plant? I mean, that was the challenge. So we made it fun and we made it relatable through videos. And I actually had employees deliver a fun fact about the plant at the plant while they were engaging with the plant. So we scripted it, we filmed it, and we got creative. And it was a great way to get people to show and not tell, and get them curious as well. The other thing to think about is your spokesperson. Often the CEO or executive is not the most relatable to your audience. So think about community liaisons that are already out there. Maybe a lab technician who's particularly savvy with a great personality. Some of the best campaigns I've worked on actually had scientists as a spokesperson. They were, of course, media trained, but they loved it. But not all execs like talking to media. So make sure you find someone who does, because your audience will know who actually cares. It comes across, I've seen it before, that deadpan look of the some executives, compared to the fish scientists who just wants to get the fish up the ladder, So it's a really good way of getting your team involved as well. And taking reporters to the site, take them to a creek, take them to the plant, get them to come in and do a tour of the facility. So as I said, I'm going to leave you with these images of the Fatberg. because I know they're gross, but they really show a message. And just remind people that, sometimes marketing, it may subtract from your bottom line, but in the short term, but it may also be the thing that really gets your project over the line. So think about humanizing the problem, keeping it simple, and getting creative. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Jackie. I like what you said about bringing up this, new ideas and kind of spawning a fearful community. And I have to say that in all of the community engagement events and nonprofit events, it's a common theme, especially when you talk about development. But on my end, I make strides when I'm on site or a project. Maybe talk about renewable energy, and you get comments of like, there's no jobs in renewable energy, or wind is unreliable, and it's fear speaking. And you gotta kind of commiserate that it's fearful that wind's gonna take over coal, which it is.
That's okay.
In terms of development, like, we are gonna densify our neighborhoods. So the engagement goes both ways, but I think that's where it's important to have, things publicly communicated. So, all right, here's a forum. We're holding this to hear your concerns in Ballard, to get as many people together and talk about the lack of parking that might make people feel more comfortable with densification. So usually when there's something like you said, we're missing a piece, whether it's the marketing aspect or, wow, we've come up with a great solution that has a glaring issue that's not being addressed.
Right.
So I like the approach of, taking it on from a marketing aspect.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Okay. Again, if there's any questions and comments on this, we will circle back. But I want to bring in Dr. Beverly Scott. Last but not least, I have enjoyed my time working with Beverly. I'm sorry it's been a little bit of delay. I'm passing privileges over to you.
Oh, listen to you. Wait, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're on. You got
hear
this.
me? Yeah. Okay. Well, I will start out by saying that I am the grandmother. Okay. I have been taking notes, and I use an old time fountain pen. So I'm going to let y'all know exactly where I'm coming from. Okay. But I've been taking notes, and I always laugh and tell people there's a difference between stupidity and ignorance. Okay. Stupid you can't help, but ignorance is a lack of experience and exposure. So I have been just taking notes over here, enjoying it. So let me just kind of give you, and Robert is going to, and I want to express to everyone, I actually sat in a little bit yesterday on the WebEx, how you do this, okay? And I am getting I've been Zoomed out, Google Hangout out, WebEx, and I can keep going. And so Robert has graciously agreed that he will put the slides up over here, and I'm going to talk, okay? So a little bit about me. I live in the Bay Area now. I'm typically an East Coaster, but this was all about family, giving myself a gift for one time in my life, being able to live near my one son, his family, and the grandkids. And so 5 years ago, I came out to the Bay Area, and I'm in quarantine over here, like everybody else, most other people have been. Been in infrastructure for 40 years, okay, worked 9 systems and run 4 of them. Transportation public transport is my kind of niche of the world. I'm going to kind of and I fell into it. And this was, if you'd have asked me back in 1976, 77, what I had been in public transport, I was minding my business, teaching government and public affairs in Tennessee, had no thought in my mind that I would ever wind up being in the world of public transportation. One thing led to another. I had a former professor who sent me one of these things, thought you might be interested. And it was for a fellowship program, 18 months. There wasn't even a Houston Metro at that point in time. Long story short, I was one of the 4 people they selected. So when they asked what part of municipal government that I want to do my fellowship in, back in those days, I said the only women or people of color that I knew of who were that were visible in government. were usually in some type of relations area, and that wasn't very usual to begin with. So I have tremendous respect for relations areas today, but at that time I said I either wanted a placement in transportation, a sanitation, a public works, because I knew that we were always going to be moving people and trash. So I'm gonna tell you the honest God's truth. So I started out with the City of Houston's Office of Public Transportation. I say that to get to this point. I fell into the career. I fell into it. And quite candidly, and I think I can speak pretty because I do a lot. I came out of transport, but I do a lot now across the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And most people don't have an appreciation that there are actually 16 sectors, okay? And what I will tell you is one of the things I'm going to speak about, the part of infrastructure that we don't hear that much about, and that is the people side of infrastructure. We are I started a nonprofit about 2 years ago introducing Youth to American Infrastructure Plus, and the plus is very important because that's about values. The acronym is IYAI. And the reason that 10 years ago, when I first started thinking about this, I was really very focused on transport. I told you I've worked in 9 systems, run 4 of them, and in community after community I would go to. Literally, there was always we were always suffering from some major issue regarding didn't have the skills, people retiring, and we were just beginning to really see the beginnings, if you will, in a major way of the tremendous transformative change that was taking place in terms of technologies and all of this. And where's the workforce coming from? We in the United States did a horrible job in terms of completely icing vocational education and career technical education programs. It's become a little better over the last 5 to 10 year period of time, but literally for all practical purposes, we didn't make things anymore. We were going to be the most intelligent people in the world, and that always equated to gotta have a college degree. And I want everybody to have every degree in the world they can. But at the same time, I want to be very clear, and this is factually so, that the infrastructure careers, the bulk of them, and there are 4 lifeline sectors, okay? And that is transport, that's water, that's energy, and it's communications. Other people's data, not mine, okay? That the majority of the positions that are across those sectors are frontline positions. Those frontline positions are highly skilled, very technical, don't have to be Einstein, okay? But they do not, in the first instance, require a college degree, okay? And so I'm talking about signal, track, communications, elevators, escalators, vertical systems. They do not, okay? Once again, I'm starting from the proposition that I want everybody to get every tool, and they're going to need it in the toolkit. I can tell you that in North America in public transport, 80% of the positions, and that's us in Canada, are what we call frontline positions, okay? And those positions, for the most part, do not require the college degree. Apprenticeship programs, technical programs, very deep relationships with employers, organized labor is extremely important across the critical infrastructure sectors. I happen to have had a very, and still respectfully have a good relationship working with labor, but I always laugh and tell people, whether you like labor or not, across the critical infrastructure sectors, again, those lifeline sectors, many of those positions are unionized, okay? And so that's why those apprenticeship programs and stuff are so important. So what I will say to you is that categorically, so here I was busy focused on the transportation challenges. And then I started sitting down with executives from the water sector. they will tell you that where is the workforce, are issues in terms of the workforce. Okay. And unfortunately, and I just want you to think about it. Okay. Uh, we can tell you everything if we get much better now about being able to say, oh, we'll say in a minute, oh, our people are our greatest resource and our greatest asset. And when you really think about it, what does that really mean? Our people are our greatest asset. It's easy to say, but in terms of how we actually operationalize that as sectors, okay, we are nowhere near as advanced as we need to be. And I always tell people at the end of the day, people respect what you inspect, okay? And so I can tell you that unfortunately, we don't do a great job at all of really getting we'll do state of good repair, asset management, and all of that. We'll count every widget.
Your computer just crashed again.
Oh, it's gone down?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. You're good.
Okay, yeah, everything's froze. You just keep doing your thing. You're doing awesome.
Okay, everything's frozen. So what happened? I want y'all to think about this now, because you got to really think about it. Okay, you say, because we just dismiss it. We just talk about, oh, our people are our greatest resource. But when you start really talking about, we'll count a bridge, we'll count a structure, we'll count an elevator, we'll count an escalator. And when you start trying to really talk about across the sectors, across in a particular sector, well, how many people do you have? What are the retirements? What are the core competencies? What do you need today? How does that project out? Oh, I'm ordering 1,000 more of these, totally different propulsion systems, all of that. I got a capital program. The capital program is counting up all the widgets and the whatever. What is it ever honestly said in terms of, now what is the training? What is going to be required of the workforce if I'm changing all this out? What am I strategically doing in terms of the workforce to wind up meeting all of this technological transformation that's taking place? Okay. And I would just about defy most people. It's gotten a little bit better. You go pull a capital program off of, just go pull it down. One you develop. Okay. And I would submit that if you can find 10% of them that really do a good blowout in terms of the people aspect of those enterprises that supports what that capital program has to say, I will almost eat my hat or my fez, if you will, because for the most part, those connections don't take place. So having said that, when I got it, and so when I get very, as you can tell, passionate on this subject in terms of the people. But I laugh all the time and I say I'm one of the biggest charlatans in the world, because I've been in the business of public transportation all these years. But honestly, I've really been blessed and privileged to be in the business of community building. And at the end of the day, that is we are not the it. Infrastructure is not the it. And that's what I'm saying all these things to you, because one of the big problems that all the infrastructure sectors have too is that from an image perspective, it's not to say all of it, but it is that from an image perspective, many young people have it's out, a lot of times it's outdated. And I can tell you definitely from the transport side, I have to laugh on this one. Our crisis, when we really figured out that we had a crisis, was the first time, it was probably about 20 some years ago. And so we were, it's like, that's when it really hit us that we kind of put it all together that, we had retirements that were coming, the changes that were taking place. So we had Blue Ribbon Commission and all that. We had National Academy of Science, everybody running around doing interviews and all that. Well, anyway, they talked to young people. So when they came back to do the report out on this Blue Ribbon Commission about the condition our condition was in terms of people, they came back and they said, well, the good news is that young people don't feel badly about you. And so we were all preening in the room. But then they came back and they said the second piece of it was, well, part of the problem was, they said, well, they don't think about you at all. You're not on the Richter list. When they're talking about the careers that they're interested in and what they want to do and what they you all are really not on the list. And quite candidly, we tested that. We have an annual meeting where you call nothing but CEOs go to it. And we asked them, will you please stand up, everybody in the room who just knew that what you wanted to do when you grew up was to be a CEO of a, freight or whatever. And the first time we did that, we had 6 people out of 250 who stood up. So I kind of come back to this. And if you look in some of these other, if you just ask the question, how many people, when you are your own children, will you want to be a CEO of the utility? Do you want to be a CEO of whatever? So the image that we have to say that they just jumping up and saying that, so they're not careers that in many respects people just automatically, oh, that's what I connected. And I submit to you that part of it is because we too often focus on the infrastructure as though infrastructure is the it. And I'm going to come back to the basic proposition, which is that it's all about people, communities, and outcomes. And that is about community building. That is who we are. That is what we do. And that is what the value proposition is that, and then when we start getting off of that and understanding, instead of being as siloed as we are, that's another reason why I decided it would be an IYAI instead of just a transport, because I said, Beverly, the water sector's got the same problem. The energy sector's got the same issue. The communication sector, we all know that a good foundation for all of these careers is kind of a STEM foundation. You don't have to be Einstein, but let's face it, at our heart, we plan things, we design things, we build things, we operate them, we maintain them, and then we refurbish or rebuild. And so that STEM foundation, regardless of whether you're talking about energy, fits well, okay, in terms of the who we are. Now, I tell people we also have lawyers, and we got marketing folks, and we got doctors, and we got nurses, PTSD, drug and alcohol testing, you name it, okay? But at the heart, that's kind of who we are. And so the bulk of the positions, if you will, that are in our sectors are all around that kind of work. And that's a common foundation. So I said, Beverly, why in the heck would you go into a classroom and start talking about these careers? And by the way, careers that have a historic, persistent issue in terms of underrepresentation of women and people of color. Absolutely. And every single slide, yeah, everybody can get them, okay, goes through exactly that, okay? Women are 50% of the workforce. And the highest sector in terms of those critical ones I talked about is mine. That's public transport. And that's 20%. And that's abysmal. And then you start talking about what happens in terms of people of color. It's, just pick it. You know what I'm saying? And so we got a problem. Okay, we got a problem. I'm telling you that the best one that's out there is just by public transport, and that's horrible. So water sector is about 14% Advanced manufacturing actually did a little bit better in women. Okay, they were getting closer to the high 20s. Okay, it's ridiculous. Okay, and then like I'm saying, the issues in terms of people of color, the lack of gender representation, the racial diversity across the sectors. And these are the sectors where people are making basic, real decisions that will impact my quality of life and the quality of life for people across all these communities, across the community. So here's some of the pieces, and just to give you a sense of the fact that the career, there are major vacancies, there's major issues in terms of workforce in all of these sectors, and they are challenges, but they also present tremendous opportunities. So what do we do at IYAI? Okay, what we're doing is actually saying to young people, we really want to motivate you, excite you, interest you in terms of these careers, help them make the connection between what these careers are, okay, and how they absolutely connect up with everything you say you're interested in. Oh my God, affordable housing, clean water, mobility and access, that's what these careers are all about. That's who we are, and that's what we do. Okay. And so when we can get young people to be able to make those critical connections between what the careers actually wind up having as the impact, okay, then it's a whole different world. So what do we do with that? I mean, we have young people, it's like a boot camp almost, okay? So we have them, we do one project, it's My Beloved Community, which really takes some of what Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about. He didn't create the terminology, but My Beloved Community is, what kind of community do you really want to have? One where there's shared prosperity, one where there's respect, one where we've lifted all boats, okay? And so one of those pieces is that I say to young people, is primarily our programs right now have been around 11th and 12th graders, 10th, 11th, and 12th, is to say, look, you have a learned experience. You live in this community. And think about the infrastructure. A lot of times young people don't even think about it. It's just like infrastructure. They just kind of pass. It's like the moments of your life. They pass through the community. They don't even think about it. Okay. And then they started to say, look, what about the infrastructure? Let's talk about what the infrastructure is in your own community. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What do you think that what are you missing? What about those trees? What about the urban parks? Do you have one? Did you have a bike path? What does it look like? Do you have, when it rains, do you wind up having water that puddles and that you can't, what is it? What is it? And actually get them to make those critical connections between quality of life and their infrastructure, and respecting the fact that at 15, 16, and 17 years old, they are bringing a learned experience to that table and in those classrooms and those discussions that is as valuable as any engineer or other professional that I would have come in and talk in that room. Okay. And to respect that learned experience, if you will, that they do bring to the table because they have lived in the communities. And then what we do too is that the plus in IYAI is about values. If equality, inclusiveness, resilience, smart infrastructure are important, well, where do you get that now? Because many school systems do not even require that kids have to even have any kind of civics or any of that kind of stuff like that. So where do you acquire that kind of bigger thinking around how to make the connections on those things? Those are exposures and experiences that you have to have some way that you convey them. You have to convey it, okay? And so we put a lot into the importance of civic participation, community engagement, connecting the dots so that folks understand the decision-making processes. I always tell folks, follow the decision-making and follow the money, okay? This doesn't have to be anything that's crass, but if you're going to, freedom is not free. The quality of the decision-making processes, you need to be able to be engaged with them, whether or not you ever decide to be in an infrastructure career. We want young people to understand the importance of those investments. And I heard some people earlier talking about that. The importance of those investments in terms of the triple bottom line and why they should care, why they should be engaged, and how they become engaged. And that doesn't take, you don't have to have a mental giant about that. You just have to begin to make connections and, do things like look at, well, who are the people? Where's the accountability in my community, and who are the board members on the whatever? How are they appointed? How do they get there? Okay. Well, how does the money flow? Okay. How are those resources? All that comes from my taxes. That comes from my property. So to help young people be able to make those kinds of critical connections. And then when they can begin to see that they can really themselves wind up having an impact when they in fact wind up going into these careers. So they'll then tell their stories. We have them use their smartphones, if you will, to actually document those stories about infrastructure, why it's important to them, what did they learn, okay, and how and how on a going forward basis, hopefully they will make the decisions to want to be in an infrastructure career. But even if they don't, like I said, if you don't want to be in an infrastructure career, that's not where your head is. At least if you understand the value of what infrastructure is, the fact that that you can and you should impact, okay, can and should, so that you can be a part of that decision making. Don't even get me on that when I tell people all the time, I've lived it too many times, where what it is that even when folks are well-meaning, and this is where I go back to the fact that yes, people in communities, the communities need to be engaged in the decision making that takes place around their communities. And I've made the same mistakes going into communities and doing stuff for people instead of with them, and respecting the fact that in fact they do bring a learned experience to the table that is more profound than anything that I'll get out of a book or out of perhaps my own little view of the world, okay? And to do everything that we can to lift those voices. And so anyway, so that's what we're kind of, so we get a little bit of it is kind of building an army, but at the same time, really helping to make that critical connection. So we had our first pilot program in DC last year, and that was School of Lord Have Mercy. We have, I think it's really one of the best academies, transportation academies of public school, Cardozo High School in DC, and they've been at it for about 30 years. And we had our first pilot program there. 20 young people, and they were fascinated. I mean, and I tell you, the sector that they love the most, and I had to admit it I told my water sector counterparts, I said, you guys rock their socks, okay? They had no idea about, they said it was some of the stinkiest places they'd ever been in their lives, but they had no idea of how you could actually wind up making clean energy could really come out of all of this stuff, okay? And they were able to make the connection between things like the Anacostia Green Project and what it meant in their community and what these investments meant in their community. I think it was, who was it, was talking about the, it wasn't Jordan. Jordan, I enjoyed what you were saying. It was one of the gentlemen earlier was talking about electrification. And I can tell you right now, yeah, and on that electrification piece, I can tell you right now, it's one of the areas that we work in the North America, on just the public transit side. I'm not talking about the school buses. There are 70,000 vehicles. And coming back to the workforce issue, and we've been working on it, there's 70,000 public transit vehicles across North America. Right now, only 2% of them are electric or even in the cycle to be electric, but they're growing at leaps and bounds. I can tell you categorically that we do not have the workforce. We don't have the workforce today, and we do not have the workforce in the pipeline. If everybody said tomorrow, you got it, and electrification of vehicles is about, as a gentleman was saying, a lot more than that. It's the vehicles, it's the charging stations, it's the whole 9 yards. We do not have the workforce ready to wind up taking that on. If we had a trillion, several $trillion, whatever infrastructure package, we do not have the workforce to execute it. And that is on neither the public or the private side. That is how profound this gap is between us not getting ourselves really into this whole thing in terms of prioritizing the importance of workforce. So anyway, so I'm sure everybody is going to sleep by now, but that is the mission that we are on. And I can tell you, when the young people finished the program, and it was all anonymous. I mean, it was, so they didn't have to make us feel happy, but 100% of them said that they had never had any idea of the connection of, they didn't know about the jobs, okay? About 20% of them said they knew about them. they even knew to think about the jobs in the same ways that we were talking about them. And that was when they walked in the class. 94% when they walked out said, "Oh my God, I learned so much more." And 100% of them said that they had never, ever thought about the connections in terms of people, communities, and outcomes. Okay. And that they learned so much more. And as a result of that, okay, we went from up to 80 some percent who said that now they would consider, they definitely were putting an infrastructure career as one of the ones that they would consider when they thought about what they wanted to do when they wound up getting grown, if you will, and getting a job. So a lot of it is just simply a function of exposure. Okay, so that's Beverly in a nutshell. And I have enjoyed this year. Will our program? I call it learning from drinking from a faucet, from a fire hose, because we're in the whole midst of converting to learning management systems. But our program this year will be in Chicago, and we're going to do about 3 years of piloting in different kind of models: a schools-based program, employer-based program, a hybrid, and all of that. But we are, I have to really give it to the folks in Chicago. I thought with COVID that they would probably say, no, we're not going to move forward, but they are very interested in continuing to do so. So we told them we'd meet them, and we're bringing it online for purposes for this summer.
Well, Beverly, I sadly have to stop you there, and I think it's amazing what you guys are doing. I encourage everybody to check out IYAI and their website. The story is amazing. Your students have been amazing, and your efforts and everybody in infrastructure. And I have to say that I work in corrosion, and we have nothing but a shortage of people filling our roles, whether that's experience or actual bodies. And most of our clients that work for municipalities are strapped. The biggest issue I see is there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge that's retiring, and with that, it is lost.
Yeah.
There's no gap there's a gap to be filled, and right now we're struggling to fill it. And you know this as better than I do, Beverly.
Right.
So I want to apologize. I think you may have been muted accidentally. This computer crashed twice.
That's okay.
And I couldn't even start the PowerPoint again. So with that said, I think we've learned a little lessons to not try to run 3 PowerPoints at once. I don't see any additional questions, but I do just want to remind everybody that this is just the start, right? We threw a lot at everybody today with the goal of just throwing everything that's involved with infrastructure out. There's a lot involved. Throughout the week, we are going to be a little bit more focused on the different sectors. Tomorrow, we're going to have a trash talk seminar.
Oh, this is
wonderful. Municipal solid waste from a public, private, and nonprofit perspective in what's being done. Wednesday is the water discussion again, cross-sector discussion, and then Thursday we transition into green spaces and energy, kind of a dichotomy, right? You don't think of green spaces when you think of traditional energy, but all of that is changing. And most importantly, Friday, we were going to focus on equitable infrastructure, things like Beverly had brought up, and ways so we can move forward in a sustainable, equitable manner, focusing on inclusion, cultural preservation, and kind of looking at some of Seattle's really cool infrastructure projects, how they started and how they've really shaped the city. So again, I want to thank everybody that's been on this call. It was a long call. Hiccups happen with digital presentations.
I want a platypus.
Right? Yeah, Jackie, how do we get our platypus sent?
You might have to get a stuffy, because they're few and far between, even in Australia. So, but if you are in Australia, I do encourage you to go down and just sit quietly. You never know.
my God, they're so cute.
They're amazing
We
creatures.
do have a comment from Amin. Amin, I'm going to unmute you. And if you have any commentary on it, like I said, as to Aya and Beverly.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for your time today and for that presentation. I joined extremely late, probably about 15 minutes ago, but I'm excited for all the events this week.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And like I said, check out her site. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to run through the whole presentation. I mean, just the story of the logo alone, but all the work and youth that you, I mean, you've touched, and for the rest of their lives, they're going to look back on Aya.
Well, Jackie will love this. Jackie, young people at a high school were the ones, I always said I'd have young people do the logo and everything. I never would have been smart enough to go with script. I never would have picked blue and yellow. Okay. And the kids at Kennedy High School in right outside of Oakland, okay, Berkeley area. They're the ones who they did it.
Yeah. The kids are amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's a great story. I love that. Yeah.
Thanks again, everybody. I think that concludes the kickoff, and I hope to see everybody later in the week. Like again, it's all free events, and this will be building next year where we'll have in-person facility tours and hopefully no epidemics. So let's all stay healthy, eat our vegetables, hydrate.
Yes. Robert, you're awesome. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Robert, this is good. Appreciate it.
I'll be collecting questions, and there will be a follow-up blog. So as people generate things, we'll have follow-up. So thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, leave event.